the Psalm series, we focused on the torture and the death of Jesus. Now, the one characteristic that we pulled from this focus is that God is gracious. Now, this might sound like an odd characteristic to talk about when we see Jesus being flogged and tortured, right, and hung on a cross and mocked. But the more we look into it, the more we dig deep and understand what really went on, the more it makes sense that one of the main characteristics of who God is that He is gracious. And so we looked at Psalm chapter 22 with David writing this psalm, and there are so many prophecies focusing on the torture and the death of Jesus that we can't possibly cover them all, but we were only going to focus on a couple here out of Psalm chapter 22, where David goes into this brutal detail of someone being surrounded by, at first, a pack of dogs. A pack of dogs that were trying to do nothing but harm him, right? He says that they pierced his hands and feet because these dogs were attacking him. But then he transitions in that illustration to talking about people, saying that those people were surrounding him, whoever those people are, referring to specific people, but we never get the detail, right? Those people were surrounding him. They were beating him. They were mocking him. They were yelling insults at him, and to the point that David actually starts out the entire chapter, Psalm 22 verse 1, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Now that word forsake or forsaken means to be abandoned, to be left behind, to be rejected, to be deserted. And Jesus ended up fulfilling the details of what David wrote about in Psalm chapter 22 in the New Testament, predominantly in Matthew chapter 26 and 27. And in Matthew's account of the torture and the death of Jesus, you see Jesus surrounded by the Pharisees, the elders, the chief priests, right? The teachers of the law. And they're surrounding him, not lifting him up, but they're there punching him, slapping him, spitting on him, repeatedly hitting him in the head with a staff. They would beat him, they'd flog him, they whipped him. They literally had skin ripped off of his back because of how much they were abusing him and torturing him, right? And then he still had to take his cross and carry it to Golgotha with the help of Simon from Cyrene, and then to be crucified, and then had lots cast for his garments, which is really just a game of chance, basically to have a trophy for one of these guards to say, look what I was a part of in crucifying and beating this person who says he is God himself, right? The King of the Jews, as Pilate had written on a plaque for the cross of Jesus. Can you just think for a second about how you might respond if you were in the same position Jesus was in? Because there would be anger if it were me, and that's a vast understatement. There would be a desire for vengeance, right? There would be as far from forgiveness as I could possibly be. That's where I would be. But then here in Luke's account of the gospel, what we see Jesus saying in Luke chapter 23, verse 34, after all of this has happened, he literally says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." That grace that it takes for Jesus to forgive those people who just did all of those different things to him, right, and then hung him on the cross, that is a grace that we can't even begin to understand. It's a grace that is a strict characteristic of who God is, and not just something that God does or that God gives out. Well, the reality of all this is that our sin, your sin, my sin, the sin of all of humanity, is what hung Jesus on that cross, making you and I no different than those who tortured him and those who killed him. Right? He also shows you and I the exact same grace that he showed those people when he was tortured and crucified by them. But the question that I want to ask is, what is our response to that? Because the purpose of grace is not just to forgive sins. We think about it from the forgiveness of sins typically alone. It's not just to forgive sins. Grace is God's invitation into a deeper relationship with him. He forgives our sins so that we can grow in a deeper relationship with Him. Forgiveness of sins is a byproduct to what God really wants, which is us in a personal relationship growing with depth continually. As Ephesians 6 says, it is for the purpose of grasping how wide and how long and how high and how deep the love of Christ is. So a few questions for you to think about and to process together with the group is: first, what aspect of the torture, crucifixion, and the death of Jesus stands out to you the most, and why? Question number 2, in what ways have you accepted the grace of God without drawing into a deeper relationship with God? And question number 3, what do you think it means that grace is God's invitation into a deeper relationship with Him?